Hi and welcome to video 1 in the series, a video on data types. So the purpose of this video, guys, is to cover what you need to know for your theory and Python programming, and to explore the significance of data types because they are actually fundamental to computer programming and even to the way that your computer works as well. So guys, as always, the Python Monster resources are there to supplement your learning from the classroom if you find them useful. You may also find them useful for your revision as well. So that's the Python booklets and these videos, of course. So let's jump in and have a look at what a data type actually is. So a typical textbook definition of a data type would be: a data type is data that shares common characteristics. And typically data is divided up and organized as number data types or text data types, and a data type called the Boolean, which we will look at in more detail in the next few videos or so. So one of the challenges that I had as a student with data types was that although it wasn't particularly complicated and there wasn't a lot to learn, I found it difficult to remember because there wasn't much context or significance with data types. So for me, there was always that so what question, like, is this really important or is it just a convenient way of describing data? And the short answer to the question, guys, is that actually it's fundamental to the way that computer programs work and the way that Python sort of communicates with your computer to help in the management and storage of data. So to give you a little bit of background and context, I put a slide up. It's not relevant, well, it is relevant, but it's not needed for your exams, guys. So you're not going to get tested on anything that you see on the slide, but I thought it would be helpful for you to sort of be able to say, now I can understand how important this stuff is and where the definition comes from. So the good news is that there's not a great deal for you to have to remember. The not so good news is it's difficult to remember because there's not a lot of meaningful context behind this particular topic. So why are data types important? Well, as you know, computers only talk the language of zeros and ones, and with the best will in the world, even with increased memory, it's very, very difficult for a computer to use simply combinations of numbers and zeros and ones to represent all the different types of data and their different types of context that we and as human beings are used to applying. Okay, and to give you a really simple example of how life can be really difficult for a computer just speaking a language of zeros and ones, the @ character is actually stored in a computer using the binary code 01 followed by 6 zeros. Hey, take a look at this, because the number 64 is also stored in a computer as 01 followed by 6 zeros. So that's actually quite shocking that the computer can have this potential conflict with two completely different types of data that we tend to use in completely different ways, but actually trying to store it as exactly the same binary code. So data types are absolutely fundamental to help a computer to interpret, organize and store data when you write code, because without that it would be almost impossible for a computer to understand the context of the data that you're storing. Your computer has no idea the difference between an @ character and the number 64. As far as it's concerned, they are exactly the same thing, represented by 01 and 6 zeros. So if you think about it, the character, okay, the @ character is important to us because we use that in things like emails and in text and communicating using text in general. The number 64 is important for us because it's a number that we want to do maths with. All right, so if the computer can't tell the difference between the two, then we are never going to get that code interpreted in the right way. So one of the ways that we can help when we write a computer program is we tell the computer, if you like, via Python, what the context of the data is that we want to store. So if we define the @ character as a text data type, then the computer can say, right, if it's a text data type, I will go and store 01 followed by 6 zeros in a part of memory that I will reserve just for data which has a text context. In other words, that's what the user wants to use it for. If as a computer programmer I use a number data type to define data which is represented by 01 and 6 zeros, the computer will go, Okay, so this needs to be stored in a part of memory that I will reserve just for data that we do maths with. So it's a very, very complicated topic, helping a computer via the engineering and the architecture of a computer to be able to contextualize data. But so this is just a simple example of some of the challenges that a computer can have. So we as programmers, we specify the data type to help the computer to interpret, organize and store data, okay, so that it can be provided for us or presented to us in the right context. Okay, so let's go back to stuff which you do need to know for your GCSE, but hopefully the previous slide has helped you to understand a little bit about why we use data types in the context. Okay, so when it comes to numbers, we have a choice of two different types of data type. We can use the integer data type, or we can use a data type which some people call the float data type and which other people call the real data type. It's the same thing, just two different names. So the integer data type is a number data type which is reserved for integers. Those are whole numbers that could be positive. It includes 0, and obviously it includes positive numbers as well. If, however, the number that we're working with is a decimal, so it has a decimal point in, then we need to associate that with the float or the real data type. So anything with a decimal point in, essentially, that includes 0.00 as well, but negative decimal numbers and of course positive decimal numbers as well. So the integer data type and the float data type are the two examples of data types where we just want to do maths with numbers. Okay, now in contrast we have another type of data which you sort of got a hint at from the previous slide, which has nothing to do with maths and is all about text that we typically use to communicate. And we have a choice of two data types for text. The first one is the Char data type, which is a data type reserved specifically for individual characters. Okay, individual characters, you can see some examples on the slide. These are not just alphanumeric characters, they are any character on your keyboard. And in fact, if you think about it, this could include any characters on anybody's keyboard. So as an example of that, this is a Chinese keyboard, okay, and you can see all of these wonderful characters which are potentially needed as part of the Chinese language to communicate. So programming language like Python also needs, and your computer as well of course, also needs to cater for a whole myriad of potential characters that need to be available for communicating. Okay, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in future videos when we look at ASCII and Unicode tables that give us a representation of all the different characters that we can use. Okay, so the other type of text data type is the string data type, and this one is reserved for multiple characters. So in many cases that's what you and I recognize as being words or sentences, but of course it can be jumbled up stuff, it could be passwords, it could be login IDs, email addresses, basically anything we don't want to do maths with. So that's one of the reasons why on the slide I have dropped in a cheeky little number, or at least it's supposed to look like a number. Okay, a fake mobile phone number. There we go. So the question is, why would we want to store a mobile phone number as a text data type if it's called a number? And of course I've alluded to this already, because it is not being used for maths. We are not going to take one mobile phone number away from another, or we're not going to multiply two mobile phone numbers together. We would include that as a text data type, and in fact it would be a string because it comprises of more than one character. Okay, now the odd one out a little bit is the Boolean data type, which can have one of two possible values, either true or false. The significance of the Boolean data type won't become obvious until much later on your course, and in fact in the videos we will cover the Boolean data type in a little bit more detail and it become a little bit more meaningful. So there are essentially, for your theory GCSE guys, you need to know that there are 5 data types. Okay, 5 data types at the back of your mind: the integer, the float, the char, the string and the Boolean. The 5 data types you need to know for your GCSE. So just to add a spanner into the works, in fact in Python there aren't 5 data types, there are 4. Okay, and it's not the first time you will come across Python doing things slightly differently to the rest of the world. So in Python there are 4 data types, and you can see straight away from the slide that the missing data type is the char. And you've probably read the slide and realized why. In Python the string data type does the job of both. So the string data type can be used to represent single characters. It can also be used to represent multiple characters. Again, something which you and I would typically recognize as words or sentences. Okay, so there's no point in having a char data type in Python, because string does the job of the char data type as well as the string data type. Okay, so just remember that for your theory there are 5 data types, but you will never come across the char data type in Python. Okay guys, so that's it for this video. Let's just go back to the definition. Okay, a data type is data that shares common characteristics. So we talked about the big difference between text and number data types is the fact that with text data types you cannot do maths with text data types. Okay, with number data types you use those for doing maths, excuse me, but you would never use the number data type for formulating paragraphs or sentences or texting on social media or on your smartphone, for example. Okay, data is divided up and organized as number types, text types, and the data type called the Boolean. And certainly when it comes to number types and text types, we talked a little bit earlier on about the fact that if we can't help Python and your computer contextualize the data, in other words, they need to know a little bit more about what you want to do with it, your computer cannot tell the difference. As far as it's concerned, a 0, 1 followed by 6 zeros is exactly that, and it doesn't recognize it as being either a number or a character. Okay, so we need to provide the context to help the computer manage and store data. Okay guys, that's it for this video. I will see you in video number 2.